that. First, though, it's 7 minutes past 12 and investigations found that a Sudanese national who died while trying to cross the channel could be much older than previously thought. A French prosecutor says documents suggest he could be in his late 20s instead of in his teens. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, tweeted the upsetting incident serves as a brutal reminder of the abhorrent criminal gangs and people smugglers who exploit the vulnerable. But the Bishop of Dover, Rose Hudson-Wilking, has urged the government to show more compassion.
We cannot, as a humane society, have people coping with the level of poverty that drives them, or war, or natural disasters. So we have to begin with compassion and then do all the other things that we need to do in the long term so as to prevent young people, or anyone for that matter, taking such unsafe routes and ending up dead in the seas as we have found.
Fizza Qureshi is the CEO of the Migrants' Rights Network, an NGO campaigning for the rights and justice for all migrants. Thank you for joining us, Fizza.
Thank you, Helen, for having me on.
I mean, this must be absolutely heartbreaking for you. Nobody wants to see people taking these perilous journeys, but how do we get a grip on it?
You're absolutely right. It's tragic and heartbreaking to hear. One, that people are making the journey, and obviously some are able to make it across safely. But then, obviously, of the tragedy of yesterday with the Sudanese young boy. The only way to really get a grip on this is to make all safer alternatives available, and we have to have those safe routes. So whereas the Home Secretary wants to take a tough approach to make these routes unviable, we know that that won't work if those alternatives aren't available. And those safe routes are easily able to be put into place. So we have had a child refugee scheme, which was called the DUB scheme, which was successful in resettling some unaccompanied minors, but that has come to an end, unfortunately. That would be one way to reopen that scheme so that these people don't. So at least unaccompanied minors won't be having to take those risky steps and desperate measures. And then there's other ways as well. So humanitarian visas and family reunification schemes. I think, as the Bishop of Dover said, we need more compassion, but we also need to think about alternatives as well, rather than just taking this tough approach that the UK is trying to take at the moment.
What do you make of that approach? Is it the right one?
Having a tough approach just will not work. And we know that it kind of enforcement and a focus on enforcement isn't working. We can see that already. People are still taking those desperate journeys. We know that people still remain in those camps on the edges of France and near the Channel. And so there has to be another way to kind of help with this issue. And we would urge the government to really be thinking about its international, but also its moral obligations to people who are looking for safety and protection.
And what about the French government? What would you urge them to do?
We would equally ask the French government to take their responsibility as well in this. And we're aware that the camps that are on the edges of France have the people in those camps have experienced police brutality. They don't have asylum support and accommodation, and hence they're in those camps. So we would also urge the French to take their responsibility and understand why their asylum process isn't effective and working as well, and offer these people the same support that they deserve.
Why are there so many people this year attempting that crossing? Because a record number of people trying to get across the Channel this year.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we probably don't have the correct figures anyway. We don't know how many people have attempted those crossings and are unaccounted for, haven't been discovered. The pandemic will also play into that, because the camps themselves have been forcefully closed down. Volunteers haven't been able to provide the support that those people need in the camps during the crisis. There's been an increase in police brutality as well of those camps. So there'll be a range of issues. But also, if you think about the pandemic, many of those people may have taken other routes, which were slightly more safe. I can't say completely in terms of coming via lorries. But now, with sometimes the only route being available is crossing via a boat, then they will take those desperate measures if nothing else is available.
Fizza, it seems so wrong to use the word hopeful in the same sentence that we're talking about the loss of a young person's life, but are you in any way hopeful that this tragedy will shock people into action?
I think we have to be hopeful. Otherwise, there isn't much else, unfortunately. We had the tragedy with Ayaan Kurdi, the young toddler that washed up on the beach in Greece, and that obviously created outrage and a lot of outpouring. But the problem is that the implementation of those alternative routes aren't being put in place quick enough. So we are unfortunately, I think, going to see more tragedies like this occurring. But we hope that there will be momentum, and the public and others will urge the government to change their approach on this.
That is a stark but a necessary warning. Thank you, Fizza Qureshi, who is the CEO of the Migrants' Rights Workers. It is 13 minutes past 12. Now, if you are a podcast person,